Hi everybody, this is Mr. McCreary, and this is going to be an overview of Chapter 2 of our textbook involving cultural diversity. There's two sections in this chapter. The first one is called The Meaning of Culture, and the second section of the chapter is called Cultural Variation. I also, throughout the chapter, touch on some of the more current controversies with regard to some of the things that come up in Chapter 2. Now, I want to start off here by talking about some first impressions. And I'm going to show you some photographs here. And I want you to try to pay attention to your immediate or initial reaction to the photographs. Do you have generally a positive feeling when you see the photograph, a negative feeling of any kind, or neutral, meaning you don't really have any strong feelings either way? So let's go through the photographs, and then I'll come back to each one and explain the significance of each one. Here's photograph number 1. Photograph number 2. Number 3. Number 4. Number 5. Number 6. Number 7. Number 8. Number 9. Number 10. Number 11. Number 12. Number 13. And number 14. So after taking a look at all those photographs, here's the question to take a look at now. What caused or influenced you to answer or have at least the reaction that you did when you saw the photograph? Why did you have a positive reaction to some? Why did you have a negative reaction to others? And why did some of the photographs really not move you at all? Well, I want to go back to the beginning because each photo was coupled with another one. So in essence, the first two photographs were linked together, the third and fourth photographs were linked together, and so forth. So let's briefly go back and we'll take a look at each one and see how they are connected. These first two photographs involve, of course, some sort of body adornment and piercing. Now, most people today in American culture in 2012, probably, especially kids, would not have much of a problem with this photograph because tongue piercings and similar piercings like that, to a certain extent, are generally deemed to be pretty calm, pretty average. Certainly, that was not the case 50 years ago. So our culture has changed quite a bit in terms of body piercings. But today, particularly the younger people, this picture would not generally be all that offensive. However, this picture here comes from obviously a very different culture than the American culture. Now, most kids today in America would look at this picture and have somewhat of a negative reaction to it because it's very strange when compared to the American culture. Now, sociologists, when they study culture, are certainly going to look at these types of details, but basically look for the patterns. So, for example, American culture, this is how piercings work, and in other countries around the world, they have their own variety of body piercings and body adornment. What sociologists will focus on are the patterns. What are the similarities in both, and also what are the differences, and not really get into the judgments as to what's right and a wrong way to do it, just the differences and why people react the way they do. This photograph obviously involves some tattoos, and generally in American culture today, based in 2012, most people are not going to have an issue with that type of tattoo. However, even in American culture, we tend to have limits, and this gentleman could be a very nice young man, but according to our standards today in terms of the American culture, my guess is that this gentleman is going to get some very strange looks by most people that he comes in contact with, because he is not conforming to the basic norms of the American culture. Certainly pizza is certainly a very big staple in American diet, and this, of course, would not be. In class, I give the example of the show Fear Factor, in that they will force contestants to eat similar types of things, or bugs, worms, and things like that. And I tell the students that that is actually food in other places around the world. So the show Fear Factor is not about someone getting physically sick because of the food. It's not the physical side of it. It's the mental side of knowing that you are eating something that is so foreign to your culture. So it's not a physical barrier that the contestants have to overcome. It is a mental barrier because they are eating something that is so foreign from their particular culture. Now, this picture of this man holding the guns, for most people in the dominant American culture, this is probably going to be seen as an offensive picture, something that's going to bring up some negative associations with this photo. It is coupled with this one because there are similarities. Both pictures involve people in what is probably their daily occupation. They both make money, they both make a living. This gentleman is probably, we can assume, if we assume maybe a gang member and so forth, might be making their living very differently than these people here. These people here, of course, are doing it the way our society deems to be the appropriate way, but they are both making a living. These people in this business situation certainly have their norms in terms of how they're supposed to dress, but this gentleman also has his norms in his subculture as how he is supposed to dress. Both use technology. They have their own version of technology. Here would be guns and the appropriate use of when to use the guns. In this picture here, you have other forms of technology and the appropriate use of that. Could be Blackberries, could be laptops, and a number of other activities as well. So the concepts are the same. The details are different depending on the culture or the subculture that you're in. Here we have a typical baseball scene in America. Baseball is still considered to be the national pastime, and so most people are not going to find this picture to be unusual. In fact, most would probably have some sort of a positive reaction to this photograph. However, this photo here is generally not an American type of sport. This would be a Celtic sport, and certainly what they're wearing and what their behaviors are with this wrestling type activity would seem to be a little strange to people in the American culture. The theme, though, athletic competition, is the same. The details, of course, are a little bit different. These young men are involved in a rite of passage. In their particular culture, boys go through a particular event, and at the end of that event, they are officially declared a man to their village. In America, we have similar things. We don't have one definite event which pushes people in adulthood. We have our own version of rites of passage. Driver's license, graduating high school, graduating college, getting married, your first job, your first apartment. Those are all a variety of different things that transition our young adults into adults. Here we have a typical beach scene, which is probably going to bring up good memories for most people in America. Not going to be too offended by that. However, this picture here, certainly we have a very different culture, and specifically in terms of what the expectations are for women, in terms of what they're allowed to wear in public and how they are supposed to act. Certainly, if this group of girls were to all of a sudden live in this culture, they probably would be in some serious trouble if they were to continue to dress like they would as American teenagers. So basically at the end of this photograph activity, you can tell that culture plays an enormous role in terms of how we see the world. Most Americans have been raised, born and bred in the United States, and therefore have picked up on the norms, the values, the behaviors, the language of the American culture. And so they are going to see the world through the eyes of someone who has been raised in an American culture. The problem with that, sometimes people develop biases, and that's one thing that sociologists try to rid themselves of, and just strictly study the differences in cultures and not make judgments as to right or wrong, good or bad, with regard to studying other cultures. So that's a basic introduction to Chapter 2, and stay tuned for Part 2 of our look at Chapter 2, Cultural Diversity.